Hi folks, this is International Master Kostya Kavutskiy, and today I'll be doing a second part in the video series on imbalances and how you can use imbalances to understand the position and make good decisions. Today's video we'll be talking about the dynamic imbalances. In my opinion, this includes king safety, piece activity, and the initiative. These are the three imbalances we will mostly be focusing on in today's lesson. Now, to review, an imbalance is any kind of significant difference between the two positions. So, looking at this first game today, our first example, we have quite an imbalanced position, and I'll point out some of the static imbalances as well because they're obviously relevant to the actual evaluation of the position. So, king safety doesn't seem to be a huge issue for either side. Both kings seem very safe. The only imbalances I see in the position is, first off, the minor pieces. White has two bishops versus bishop and knight, so this is usually considered a small advantage to hold the two bishops. And the pawn structure. White has an isolated queen pawn on d4, which can be considered a weakness because it has no pawns defending it and is easily put pressure on by black here. So the position here seems relatively balanced. It seems like white has a little bit more activity as well. The pieces seem to be a little bit more active, but black has a very solid grip on this d5 square. Now here the great Viktor Korchnoi finds a very nice combination for white, and we'll see that his evaluation of the resulting position based on these imbalances was spot on. So here he starts with the move bishop takes f6. Now black is forced to recapture with the knight. If black takes with the bishop, he simply loses a piece after knight takes d5 because the bishop on f6 is hanging, ed, and queen takes f6. So knight takes f6 was played, and here comes d5. So white is able to get rid of his weakness and blast open the position, completely opening up his rooks in the center of the board. Now note why this is so favorable for white. Earlier we mentioned that white has a small edge in piece activity, and the main drawback of white's position was this weakness on d4. So with one move, white is able to not only get rid of his weakness, but also open up the position for his more active pieces. So understanding this from this angle shows that it's clearly favorable for this advance to be on white's side. Now after d5, black is more or less forced to take, and white plays bishop takes d5. Now this bishop on d5 is very strong. In the game, black decided not to capture. If knight takes d5 was played, after knight takes d5, black is losing material since white is now threatening knight to e7 check, as well as knight to f6 check, which would win the queen. So black here is just losing material and it has to go down the exchange. Instead, black played the move rook to b8, defending the pawn on b7. So the position has changed. The pawn structure is now almost completely symmetrical, 2v2 on the queen side and 3 versus 3 on the king side. Now when the pawn structure is symmetrical, what this usually means is that the side with more active pieces is going to have an advantage because the pieces are more active and are going to be dominating the board. Now here's the key difference between dynamic imbalances versus static imbalances. Dynamic imbalances are likely to change very quickly, meaning within the next few moves. In the previous video, we talked about static imbalances, things like being up material, having a good pawn structure, controlling extra space. These are things that are going to stay the same, more or less, for a long time. Dynamic imbalances, in this case piece activity, this can run out very, very quickly. For example, if we gave black an extra move here to play rook e8 or rook to d8, black would most likely be okay. Or if black could put his king on the corner in h8, then black would be ready to take the bishop on d5 and would not be suffering from all of these knight forks. Meaning that the value of one move in these dynamic positions is very, very high. If black just got an extra move, white's advantage would simply run out. So why this is important to emphasize is because if you're playing a game and you feel like you have a dynamic advantage, your pieces are more active or your opponent's king is in trouble, it means you need to act very quickly and capitalize on your advantage. Meaning, when you realize your pieces are active, it means you don't have time to make pawn moves like a2, a3 would not be a very useful move in this position. You should be looking for active piece play in order to make the most of your position. So that is exactly what Korchnoi does here. He sees that he has a potential discovered attack on the queen, and he starts with the move bishop to b3, hitting the queen. So energetic play means you're trying to create a threat on almost every single move. Black played queen to c7, and now the knight comes in, knight b5. So again, we're targeting the queen. We're not giving black a chance to establish any kind of defense or fight against white's activity. Queen b6 was played, and white jumps in with knight to d6. Now white's idea is that his knight and his bishop are putting massive pressure on the f7 pawn, which prevents black from activating the rook on f8. In fact, white is threatening a sacrifice on f7 based on his huge pressure against this weakness in black's position. In the game, black played rook bd8, and this simply loses on the spot to knight takes f7. Very nice combination. The point is that after rook takes f7, white can either play rook to e7 here right away, which would win the exchange and give white a winning material advantage, or white can play as he did in the game, trading rooks on d8, queen takes d8, and taking the pawn on b7. Now the rook on f7 is pinned, so white is trying to put as much pressure on it as possible before taking back. And after the move queen d7, black had to resign in view of rook e7. This simply ends the game. The point is, after rook to e7, if black takes the queen on b7, white takes back, and white is going to win the rook on f7 and be up in exchange with a winning position. So I hope this game showed what kind of things you should be looking for when you feel like you have a dynamic advantage. What Korchnoi did excellently is, once you realize that the pawn structure was simplified back in this position, he sees that he has more active pieces, and he immediately looks for energetic ways to increase the activity of his pieces, look for a target in his opponent's position, and exploit his attacking power. If he wasn't able to do this, then black would be able to get back in the game and most likely equalize, since the pawn structure is so equal. With that, let's look at our next example. Our next example here is a very nice game played by the great world champion Bobby Fischer, and here he is playing against a very strong player, Leonid Stein. Now the position, as you can see, is very imbalanced. The material is equal, but the way the pieces are arranged is completely different. Black has most of his pieces on the queen side, whereas white's pieces, especially the two bishops and the knights, are aiming at the king side. And in this case, although it seems like black's king is safe, white's pieces are going to very quickly infiltrate and attack black king. And I want to show you guys how Fischer did this, because he really did a nice job and demonstrated some very interesting ideas here. So he starts with the move knight f to g5. And the main point I want to make about dynamic imbalances, once again, is when you realize that you have an advantage in piece activity, almost always your best option is going to be to go for the initiative and try to attack. Otherwise, your opponent will be able to take over the initiative and activate his own pieces. Here, if black is given a couple moves, he'll be able to jump in with the knight and with the bishop and start creating huge counterplay. So the value of one move, again, is very important. So knight fg5 was played, and now white is threatening, among other things, to play queen h5 to unleash the discovery knight f6 check and basically target the h7 pawn. So white is going for a kingside attack. If black played the move h6, this would run into a very nice move, knight to h7. And the point is that after king takes h7, black is opened up to a discovered attack, knight takes c5. The bishop on b1 is hitting the king, and white is going to win back the bishop with interest, as he's going to be forking black's pieces at the end. So black would have to move the rook to e8, and white has a winning combination here with knight f6 check. If black takes on f6 with the pawn, we come in with queen g4 check, king h8, knight d6, threatening knight takes f7. Black is forced to take on d6, and queen f5 is leading to a forced mate. White threatens queen h7 check, king g7 is more or less the only move, and after bishop takes h6, it is mate next turn with queen h7 coming. Okay, it will be a few more moves. King takes h6, queen h7 check, and the king has to go for a run, and white is going to be able to checkmate this king very soon. For example, queen g7 check, g4, and queen h6 looks like a nice mate. So after knight fg5, black is already in huge danger, and Liechtenstein tried bishop takes e4. I think this is a nice defense. He's getting rid of one of white's major attacking pieces. Queen takes e4 was played, g6, and queen h4. Note how with every move, white is trying to make a threat. Otherwise, the tempo, the initiative of the game might shift to the opponent. Black is forced to play h5, and now the h7 pawn is no longer a target, so Fischer switches, queen to g3. Really nice move, and now he's eyeing the g6 pawn, and he wants to break with e5, e6 in order to undermine black's king. Knight c4 was played, and here white played the move knight to f3, which is not so bad. He's threatening to sacrifice on g6, after which the queen would come in and white would have a winning attack. But a lot stronger for white was the immediate breakthrough pawn to e6. And I would imagine that Fischer, of course, calculated this variation, but based on his notes on the game, most likely miscalculated and didn't see the strongest continuation for white. Which brings us to another very important point about dynamic imbalances. A lot of times it can be very easy to take advantage of a static advantage. When you have extra material, your plan is very simple. Try to trade pieces, simplify the position, and get to a winning endgame. But when you have a dynamic advantage, meaning your pieces are more active, it's not always easy to find the most precise attacking continuation. So that is why you really have to work on not only your combinational vision, but your tactics abilities, and it's really important to study great attacking players such as Fischer, Tal, Kasparov, and so on to see how they attacked in similar positions. Otherwise, you'll get to a game, you'll get this advantage of more active pieces, and you won't be able to figure out the right way to capitalize on your advantage. So here the breakthrough e6 was winning, and the point is that black more or less has to play f5. White has the very strong move knight to f7. Now we're threatening queen takes g6, and we're threatening bishop takes f5. Black is forced to give up the exchange. White was also threatening the queen. And after e takes f7 check, king takes f7, the position at first glance is not so clear. Even though white has extra material, black has some very strong knights that are supported by the pawns, and it seems like white's attack doesn't really have an obvious follow-up. But we do have bishop takes f5, very, very strong sacrifice. G takes f5, and after bishop h6, now white's attack is again picking up steam. So again, another very important point. When you are attacking, you have to be willing to invest material in order to open up the opponent's king and make the most use out of your pieces. And after a move like bishop f6, covering the g7 square, white can play rook a d1, and white has a very, very strong initiative here. Both rooks are lined up in the center and are ready to attack black's king. White's queen is ready to come to f3 and then to h5. And here it seems like black's knights and rook were very far away from the king in order to be able to defend. So I imagine that white would have a winning attack here. In the game, as I mentioned, white played knight to f3 and ended up winning in very nice style. So if you guys are curious, I would encourage you to look through the rest of the game in the PGN provided. But for the purposes of this lesson, we'll end here since already we saw how white could have won the game with this e6 breakthrough. Our last example here is a game by the great Paul Keres, and he was playing white here against another strong player in the USSR Championship of 1940. And I wanted to show this game just to show a couple more elements of some things to consider when you do have a dynamic imbalance in the position, when you do have an advantage in piece activity or you're holding the initiative, what kind of moves and ideas to look for. Here, this is basically a late opening, early middle game stage. As we can see, white hasn't castled yet, and black is already castled. So for the moment, it does seem like black has a safer king. But white has some very nice piece activity in the middle of the board. And here Keres makes a really nice move that I think a lot of players might hesitate to make. He plays the move b2 to b4. So simple enough, he's attacking the bishop. Black has to play bishop e7, and white fianchettos the bishop on b2 and gets ready to castle queenside so that he can go after black's king on g8. Now, really interesting point here is that this move b4 is creating another weakness in white's position. A lot of players, if they want to fianchetto the bishop, they would have played the move b2, b3, and then play bishop b2, which seems like a lot more solid structure. So why did Keres play b4 here? Well, he wanted the tempo. By attacking the bishop, he gets an extra tempo to develop, and to Keres, this is more important than the newly created weakness on b4. He values piece development here a lot more than the weakness of the pawn on b4. And this is where the concept of imbalances is really the most important. Because it's one thing to recognize an imbalance in the position, but it's another thing to take that into account and start making actual decisions over your evaluation of everything. Here I think is a very instructive moment that he realized that the extra tempo he gains by playing b4 is a lot more valuable to him than whatever black gets by attacking this weakness on b4. In the game, black played bishop f6, white castles long, and note that queen takes a2 in the position is possible but would lose to bishop c4, after which white is going to get an immediate initiative against black's king. In fact, after queen a4, bishop takes f7 is already winning material, with idea rook takes f7, queen d5, and black is losing the rook. So instead, black played knight to c6, black is trying to develop as quickly as possible, and h4. Definitely the most natural attacking plan in the position. Black has already created a hook on g6 for white to attack with this pawn, and so white would like to open up the h-file and activate his pieces in order to try and get a mating attack against black's king. In the game, black played h5, preventing this plan, but of course white doesn't hesitate at all and plays g4. White's main consideration here is to try and open up as many files as possible. This of course comes from an understanding that white's advantage here is in piece development. White has the more active pieces, so the best decision white can make here is to try and open the game up as much as possible. Now in the game, black played bishop takes e5. If h takes g4, without a doubt, white would ignore the pawn on g4 and simply play h5. At this point, material has less value than the initiative. It's all about opening files. We do not care about material here very much, especially the number of pawns. It's all about trying to open files and get an attack going against the black king. Here, I think white would have a decisive attack. If you want to see more variations, feel free to check out the PGN where you can see the full game as well as all the different possibilities for both sides. Instead, black played bishop takes e5, f takes e5, and took the pawn on g4 with the queen. Now, of course, white is down a pawn, is looking for the attack, has no intentions of trading queens, and played queen to e3. Now this queen can potentially jump into h6, and after white breaks with e6, white is going to be able to open up the bishop on b2 and win the game. White's other threat in the position is to play queen h6, followed by bringing a rook to g1 and sacrificing bishop takes g6, which would lead to a mating attack. In the game, black played knight takes b4, and here comes a very strong move, e6. Keres understands that the most powerful piece in his position is the dark-squared bishop, so he gives up another pawn to increase the scope and use the full power of this bishop. Now, however black captures the pawn, for example bishop takes e6, white plays queen h6 and black is in big trouble. We're threatening mate on g7, and if f6, then after the move rook to g1, black is simply lost. The g6 pawn is falling and black is getting mated. So black played the move knight to d5, attacking the queen, and here comes a very nice combinational finish to the game. White takes on f7, rook takes f7, and plays a brilliant move, bishop to c4. Really amazing idea. The point is that if black takes the queen, white is giving mate with rook to e8 check, king has to go to h7, and rook h8 is a nice mate using the bishop on the long diagonal. If black takes the bishop, which is also hanging, white plays queen e8 check, and queen h8 mate once again. Note that the immediate queen e8 check was not working because of rook to f8. And with the queen having captured the bishop on c4, in that position white would have queen takes g6 with an immediate mate on the board. So after bishop c4, black played c6, and here comes another winning sacrifice, rook takes d5. Now after c takes d5, white again gives queen e8 check, rook f8, bishop takes d5, and black is simply getting mated. So black played queen takes c4 here, and after queen e8 check was forced to resign since king h7 runs into queen h8 check mate once again, and rook f8 also leads to queen takes g6 mate. So I hope this game demonstrated how when you do have an advantage in the initiative, or your pieces are more active, or you have a direct attack against the opponent's king, you need to value this more than the number of pawns on the board, and especially more than the specific pawn structure on the board. A lot of times the great attacking players, you can see them doing terrible things to their own pawn structure in the interest of activating their pieces and going for the initiative. Here Keres really demonstrates that by every move trying to activate his position as much as possible, not really caring about his pawn so much, and that is an evaluation he made based on understanding the dynamic imbalances. Well, hopefully this lesson was instructive for you guys, and until next time, this was International Master Kostya Kavutskiy signing off.